Good. A while ago, Sherry Crowden and others have asked that we do a presentation on the Metaverse. I managed to secure someone who taught me a lot about the internet as long as 27 years ago. Arthur Goldstuck is a South African author, journalist, speaker, media analyst, and commentator on information and communications technology, internet and mobile communications and technology. Arthur heads the Worldwide Works Research Organization, doing market research into how change is affecting business and society, and presents his findings and insights to audiences across the globe. He publishes the online consumer technology magazine gadget.co.za and is also the author of 19 books. His weekly Gadgets column is the most widely syndicated technology column in South Africa. He also writes a weekly trends column for Business Times in the Sunday Times. There's more to Arthur. You can just go and Google his name and you'll find a lot more interesting information. Now, I bought these books back in 1996 to learn about the internet, which was very new at that stage. That's the one, and here's the second one. And as you'll see, the author was, Arthur Goldstuck. So I learned a lot from him, and I feel honored to have Arthur as our presenter. I appreciate your time for preparing and presenting this, Arthur. Arthur also told me that he prefers a very interactive session. So please, you can feel welcome to ask questions as you go along. So welcome once again, Arthur. I'm looking forward to your presentation, and over to you.
Thank you, Johan. It's a privilege to talk to your group, and especially a group that has a specific interest in this area. So as a specialized group, I'm sure a lot of you already have a lot of thoughts on the topic, and you're welcome to engage me in debate through the talk. I had said to you, Johan, I'll keep it as a conversation without a presentation, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we do need some visual input. And also, quite coincidentally, just this week, I received a major report on what the metaverse is. So I've drawn on that as well, and the graphs in there are very instructive. But feel free to raise your hands while we talk. Just one word of warning. We usually tell people in meetings, practically every single meeting when they want to talk, hey, you're on mute. Well, all of you are on mute right now. So if you want to talk, just remember to unmute before we go ahead. So what I'm going to do is share the presentation with you, and we can chat informally in the course of the presentation, but at the same time, hopefully there'll be an opportunity after the presentation itself to chat more informally and to answer specific questions. So with that, I'm going to share my presentation. And I trust you can all see it.
Yes, it's fine. Thanks, Arthur.
Great. Okay, so I talk about back to the metaverse future because the metaverse has been many years in the making. The concept, or the term rather, comes from a novel written by Neil Stephenson about 30 years ago called Snow Crash. It happens to be one of my all-time favorite novels. The two novels that really, for me, were seminal in describing the world that we're in now. The one was Neuromancer by William Gibson, which was about people being able to plug their brains into computers and explore this entity called cyberspace. And that novel actually coined the term cyberspace. The irony of it is that Neil Stephenson had never used a computer at the time that he wrote, William Gibson had never used a computer at the time that he wrote Neuromancer. So it was an astonishing example of how sheer imaginative vision could conjure up the future. And then not long after that, Neil Stephenson wrote Snow Crash. And he was very different from William Gibson in that he was actually a Unix programmer. So he understood what computers could do. And the way I termed Snow Crash was, if William Gibson had known computers, he might have written Snow Crash instead of Neuromancer. But Snow Crash also was seminal and coined the term Metaverse. In the Snow Crash world, the Metaverse was a virtual world run by an evil monopolist, the Baron of telecommunications globally. He controlled all fiber optic communication, and he wanted to also control people's thoughts. So bear that in mind when you consider what Mark Zuckerberg wants to do in terms of owning the metaverse, so to speak. But with that, let's look at how the metaverse unfolded. Firstly, in the minds of the media, we are now entering the roaring 20s once again. In a post-pandemic world, while there is war, pestilence, drought, flood, famine, they also see a technological boom happening. And this is The Economist last year. The dawn of technological optimism is breaking. The speed at which vaccines have been produced made scientists household names. And tech investment boom, adoption of digital technologies, and the optimists are all giddy about a new roaring 20s in technology. However, these predictions are overblown. There is a realistic possibility of a new era of innovation, especially if governments help new technologies to flourish. While we're seeing attempts at that in the United States, we're seeing China holding back new technologies, and we're seeing Russia go to war against a country which is a critical source of the materials that go into new technologies. So it's a very mixed bag that we're seeing globally. In South Africa, the government talks about support of technology, but it's primarily lip service. But let's look at what makes up the big new technologies that we're expecting in the roaring 20s. And this, in effect, is a summary of the fourth industrial revolution. So this is the bread and butter of this particular group of University of the Third Age, looking at 4IR. And primarily it comprises artificial intelligence and machine learning. RPA, which is an acronym you'll see often, refers to robotic process automation, which is all about software that automates processes. And we've actually had it with us for many years. You may recall those who used Word and Excel actively during their careers that you were able to produce macros, and those macros were in fact the forerunner to robotic process automation, where you could automate certain processes in simple software like Excel and Word. And then cloud computing and cloud-based business modeling, then 5G, along with the instant connectivity it promises, virtual reality and augmented reality, and finally blockchain. So there are other elements to it as well. People talk about 3D printing as being a key to the fourth industrial revolution, but that truly has been overblown. We haven't yet seen the massive benefits of being able to produce products closer to the customer and closer to the source of raw materials. But there are a lot of arguments about the potential of these technologies. Stephen Hawking, before he passed away, said that AI could mean the end of the human race. And as you may know, that's Elon Musk's view as well. He sees AI as having more potential for evil than for good, and in fact, that it does spell the end of the human race as well. But he's just echoing Stephen Hawking. But the president of the Association for the Advancement of AI also said that we actually need to retain control over autonomous systems. But that's a contradiction in terms. So AI is a scary environment for many. And when AI is combined with the metaverse, you can see a world going crazy. But we've seen this before, these kind of predictions of the evils of technology, or that a dramatic new technology is not going to really deliver what it promises. And this was the great example of it, was when Alexander Graham Bell took the telephone to Western Union, and William Orton made these immortal statements. The telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. He said this was because he was really annoyed that Western Union hadn't come up with it, and some individual upstart was trying to sell it to them for $100,000. There's a fascinating backstory to it as well, where Bell's backer and Bell's father-in-law tried to offload the patents while Bell was on honeymoon. Great way to start a relationship with your father-in-law, but he managed to fend that off. Shortly after this whole incident, Western Union tried to buy the patents from Bell, and he refused. And the company that he started would eventually dominate telecommunications for a century. South Africa came 11 years later. Some of you will remember Adolf Butker. If you're of a certain age, he owned a watchmaker's shop and brought the first telephones into South Africa in 1878. And 20 or 18 years later, the city finally got its own exchange. Any of you knew him personally? I'm not sure. And this was what the cutting edge of telephone technology looked like back then. The Ericsson AC120. Anyone of you owned a Sony Ericsson phone? Well, those are the spiritual successors to this device. But you can tell this is a seriously expensive device. Most people just used a speaking tube. If any of you watched Downton Abbey, you'll also have seen the fascination with these devices back even in the 1920s, when you felt that you had to learn to operate the device. Certainly that's what this one looks like, and that's what the cell phones often present us with as well. It didn't evolve much for the next century or so. I grew up in a little town called Trompsburg in the Free State, and this is the telephone that we actually used in our home. There weren't too many households with telephones, so this one was number 33. Actually, our home number was 142. 33 was the station's number, but the station gave this phone to my mom, and she gave it to me when they upgraded to more advanced technology. And then came Netflix. This is the predecessor to Netflix. This was the first movie, or one of the first movie producing devices in the world, and also the predecessor to the television set. Actually, that was the first, one of the first TV sets ever. And this was a gentleman demonstrating the very first TV set back in 1926-27. And the New York Times made that same statement that William Orton made. They couldn't imagine that people would sit and stay glued to a screen. The average American family hasn't got time for it. So you can see that whenever a new technology emerges, people will find reasons to dismiss its significance. That photo you saw in the last slide was Philo Taylor Farnsworth, who was 21 and had grown up in a house without electricity, but he had this incredible vision, and he was able to turn that vision into the first successful TV demonstration back in 1927. He didn't invent TV, but he was the first to demonstrate it on a device, and he was only 21. The power of vision in the technology world is incredible. Now we fast forward to 2016, having seen how the past saw the future and often dismissed the future. This was Mark Zuckerberg at the launch of the Samsung S7 in Barcelona. I happened to be there. Before he walked in, Samsung was launching, or at least demonstrating, the integration of their new S7 phone. That was the launch of the S7 with their Galaxy Gear headset. And on every seat was a Galaxy Gear headset. Not to take home with us, unfortunately, but when they demonstrated the S7's integration with the Galaxy Gear VR headset, everyone in the audience was asked to put it on. And while we all had our headsets on, young Mark walked down the aisle onto the stage. And when we took off our headsets, there stood the youngest 20-something-year-old, the wealthiest 20-something-year-old in the world on stage to tout the significance of virtual reality. This is long before Facebook became Meta and before Zuckerberg expanded on what the metaverse would be. He spoke about virtual reality as being the next platform for social media. Partly what he was doing was trying to flog the subsidiary that Facebook had bought, Oculus, and their headset, the virtual reality headset called the Oculus Rift at the time. And he imagined that within a year, everyone would be using the Oculus Rift or the Galaxy Gear to access social media. There's a classic example of how we exaggerate or overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, but underestimate it in the long term. And that's a critical thing to remember in terms of the metaverse. In the long term, its impacts can be huge. In the short term, not so much. Virtual reality machines were not invented in 2016 with Samsung and Zuckerberg. They actually go back to 1990. This is the virtual reality system. It cost a mere $65,000. In South African terms today, that's of course R1 million. Back then, it was a lot less than R1 million, but it cost about R1 million to bring one of these into the country. And a couple of them were brought into South Africa, and an artist by the name of Don Searle, who works in virtual reality art, was the first person to bring one of these into the country in the mid-1990s. Around about the time I wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Internet, he invited me to come and experience the virtual reality system. And I had to climb into the machine, strap this headset onto my head, connect it to the machine, and then hold these handheld devices that were also connected to the machine. So everything was connected up, and I had to be enclosed within that barrier to avoid damaging myself or the machine. I think that was more important to them. And what I experienced then was my first deep disappointment about the virtual world, because everything was so pixelated that it was clear that I was in a low-res pixelated version of a computer game. There was no approximation whatsoever to the real world for me. I think I was fighting dragons in one game, and I was a knight with a sword in another game. But in both those cases, it was a less satisfying experience than playing a video game in an arcade back in the 1990s. So the experience of being underwhelmed by virtual reality for me goes back something like 27 years. And for many people experiencing it for the first time, the experience is almost simultaneous with when they first experienced virtual reality. Sometimes it's great. Some games work, some experiences work exceptionally well. But as an approximation of the real world, it's deeply disappointing. The point really is that it's not about the technology, but the use case. And the drone is a great parallel to that. Drones are great toys, but in most cases, they remain just that, toys. However, this is an example of a drone being used to monitor the natural environment for things like forest fires, but also to be able to film the vegetation in an environment where artificial intelligence is used to analyze the footage and make decisions on how the natural environment must be treated. So this applies all the way from emergency response to agriculture and deciding whether irrigation is required or whether any other intervention is required. Fantastic use cases for drones, but mostly they're sold as toys. And this is exactly the case with virtual reality. Fantastic use cases, mostly they're sold as toys. So let's come on to the metaverse now. Until last year, people referred to virtual reality as virtual reality. Today, they refer to it as the metaverse. And this is from a report that purely coincidentally was put out this week by Wunderman Thompson, the global ad agency, who produced a report called Into the Metaverse. And it's arrived on my desk 2 days ago. And that's what made me decide to create a presentation to share with you rather than just talk about the metaverse. And this is the critical element of the definition. Currently, it exists as a series of distinct virtual worlds and experiences. In the future, however, it will expand into an interconnected and limitless world where our digital and physical lives fully converge. This image is from a virtual world called Decentraland, which is one of the best known virtual worlds today. It's where most companies or where more companies are setting up shop than in any other virtual environment. But there has been an equivalent of Decentraland for something like 15 years, in fact, 20 years. It's an environment called Second Life. And I've been a citizen of Second Life for about 2 decades now. And it looks almost exactly like Decentraland. You can do very similar things as Decentraland, but it never got traction. And most people had never heard of it. Suddenly Decentraland comes along and becomes the flavor of the moment. It's simply Second Life given a better business model. There's one thing that none of these virtual worlds can do for you, and that is make you a cup of coffee. So if coffee is important to your working life, then the virtual world cannot replace the physical world in your working life. But that applies in many other areas. Let's have a look, firstly, at some definitions. This is also from the Wunderman Thompson report. These are key terms that people are going to start learning: interoperability, persistence, decentralization, NFT, digital twins. They're not important, most of them, but a critical term here is interoperability. The problem with Mark Zuckerberg's vision of the metaverse is that he sees it purely as a Facebook entity. In the same way that Facebook tries to control everyone's social interactions, it also wants to control your experience of the metaverse. The problem for him is that there are many metaverses. And until there is interoperability between these metaverses, you cannot really talk about a metaverse. It's many metaverses. And that for now is going to be the main challenge that is faced by anyone trying to sell the metaverse. And then they did a survey last year on what industries they expect to be impacted the most by the metaverse. And not surprisingly, entertainment comes out top. 90% of respondents in the survey said it'll affect entertainment, and very close behind that, because there's not really much difference between entertainment and advertising, came the advertising world. But a high proportion saw retail also being affected, 86%, and then employment and work, 85%. Fashion, 85% as well, and we've already seen a lot of fashion shows happening in the metaverse. Decentraland has had a major fashion week, for example, in the virtual world. And a lot of people are already earning a living from virtual fashions. So let's just stop there for a moment. That number 4, employment and work, i.e. meetings, collaboration, in-person work, conferences, etc. It's a classic example of overestimating the short term, because right now we already hate to meet via, for example, Microsoft Teams. I don't know how many of you have used Teams. I was delighted that you didn't ask me to present this via Teams. I dislike it intensely because there is so little flexibility in its usage. I love using Zoom because it's so user-friendly. Teams is the opposite. Now, you take the complexity of using Teams and you put that into a virtual environment, you're going to multiply that complexity probably 10 times. And the ability to control what you are doing, how you are seen, how you see others, how you are heard and how you hear others, and then how you can present or collaborate or share, all of those bring in additional complexity. So that 85% to me is a benchmark for exaggerated expectations rather than for this shift in how we will work in the future. The reality is that when you are working at a computer, you're not just working on the computer. You are working with people in your environment and you are taking cues from your environment. Virtual reality shuts that down. So virtual reality is in fact a diluted reality for a working environment. And it's already difficult enough to be productive with all the distractions in our current environment. Imagine a diluted environment. Some will say that it's a more focused environment. I believe it'll be a more diluted environment. And also, people start getting claustrophobic when they've been in a headset for a long period. They say you should get up every 45 minutes when you're working at a computer. I believe in virtual reality, that'll come down to something like 20 minutes, even 15 minutes. Massive implications for productivity, but also for mental well-being of workers. So that's a non-starter. In contrast, you go down to health and healthcare. There, a different picture emerges. Already, virtual reality is being used very effectively in therapy, in particular, and in terms of overcoming phobias, but also regaining confidence in social environments and the like. We are seeing massive advances. And that's a great use case. And this sums up again the significance of the use case I was talking about earlier. So where there's a use case for the metaverse, it will have a massive impact. Where it's purely for entertainment, it's going to have an impact on gaming and the like, but not so much on the working environment. These are the concerns that people expressed about the metaverse in that Winderman-Thompson survey. Those who know what the metaverse is, overwhelmingly parents are concerned about children's privacy, but even beyond children, there's massive concern about privacy. Data protection is seen as a massive problem. We already are faced with huge challenges in these environments that we feel that we have control over, like our computers and our cell phones. But in fact, our privacy is already massively compromised on cell phones. How much more so in a virtual world that we can't control or over which we have far less control? Parents, again, citing a safety of their children, and then finally bullying. And bullying isn't confined to children. There's massive bullying happening in existing metaverse entities. In Decentraland, in Second Life, bullying is a common feature. However, people to a large extent expect the metaverse to be a part of their daily lives. 82% of respondents said they see it as a place to socialize, and 70% as a place to shop. And this is what drives those expectations for the impact of the metaverse. 68% see it as the future of e-commerce. 51% though only a place to work. So only half of respondents who know the metaverse think that they'd be able to work in there. And that then has to be further segmented into what kind of work they do, because for certain kinds of work, it won't be feasible. 50%, half of respondents see it as part of their daily life. But again, this is an environment where they know what the metaverse is, but they haven't really engaged yet with the metaverse, and they haven't yet seen how it will be part of their daily lives. There's a fundamental point to bear in mind about all of this. If you are part of a family unit, the moment you put on a headset, you are cutting yourself off from the family. And that's a fundamental barrier that almost none of the people punting the metaverse has considered. They talk about the whole family putting on headsets, but that just compounds the problem. So the bottom line is there are massively exaggerated expectations of the metaverse. There is great potential for the metaverse, but between those is still a massive gap. Thank you.
I mean, I understand and I followed what you've said, and this is all somewhere on the internet. Now, if you talk about, you've said there are not a metaverse, there will be numerous ones, but I mean, is it like a website? Is there a URL that you go to and now you are on one of the metaverses, or where do you actually find it?
It's both. So there are websites you can visit. So Decentraland, for example, the word decentral with AND on the end, .com. Decentraland.com is currently the most widely used by companies who are setting up shop and advertising that environment. And it's the most active in terms of events happening in that environment. And you can log on from a web browser, any web browser. So you don't need virtual reality to go into it. Same with Second Life, secondlife.com, exactly the same idea. And there are a few others as well. Sandbox is another one. So those are some of the best known metaverse entities. The way Mark Zuckerberg and his company Meta sees it is that you'll be entering it via virtual reality headsets. And in that case, you will be basically downloading an app and you'll be synchronizing your headset with the app, and you will go into the app through your headset. You can also, with a virtual reality headset, visit websites and the like. But in most cases, they're still very poorly optimized for virtual reality. But there are websites that allow you to view virtual reality video or have virtual reality experiences through a headset on the website. But again, it's those three plus what specific VR headsets and apps allow you to experience as well. Jeff, you had a question?
Yes, Arthur. I think you've answered a little bit of it there when you explained how Zuckerberg sees it, but it seems to me to be very much a first world kind of experience, and if you've got to have a VR headset, which are not cheap, and obviously you're going to need quite a bit of connectivity speed. I can see, places in the States and Europe perhaps that can adopt it very quickly, but there are going to be a lot, major parts of the world in Asia and Africa that will never see this. So it's never going to be globally popular, I don't think, because of the challenges that those places have.
That's a very important point, and it's one that a lot of people on this continent are wrestling with as well. So that brings up the necessity for metaverse operators to understand that it has to be accessible via a regular browser, that you shouldn't need a headset for it. Facebook and its executives live in an ivory tower of first world experience and expectations. And for them, the world will be using VR headsets to experience their metaverse. But they'll quickly learn that it's not a homogeneous technological world, and it is massive discrepancies in available technology, knowledge, and connectivity. So what we are more likely to see becoming mainstream is the likes of Decentraland. And in South Africa, we have an equivalent. It's called Ubuntu Land. It's created by a company called Africa Rare, Africa R-A-R-E. And you can visit Ubuntu Land via the Africa Rare website. It's www.africarare, as I say, R-A-R-E.io. And that allows you to sign up to Ubuntu Land. You can even buy property in Ubuntu Land, as you can in all the metaverse environments. So Decentraland's business model is actually selling property, and they've sold property.
Why would you want to?
Because you want to set up a shop in one of the metaverse environments, you want to advertise in it, or you want to build your own house in which your virtual self lives, and you invite people to socialize with you because you think that this is the new social environment. That's the vision of the metaverse. And in the same way that there's a kind of land rush for domain names, or there was a land rush for domain names, and the domain names became very, very valuable. And with cryptocurrency, now we see the same thing in metaverses, in virtual worlds, where people want to own choice pieces of land in those metaverses, mostly for speculative purposes. But the supposed purpose is what I explained a few minutes ago. But what we're really seeing is, as with cryptocurrency.
What's the difference between that and shopping online? I mean, we can do that sitting at our desks.
Well, exactly. That's my argument too. But a lot of companies see the metaverse as the place where the young user of today will go. Let me share with you the retail picture of the Wunderman Thompson report quickly, just to give you their perspective, because that answers your question quite neatly. So they have an entire section on retail in Decentraland. And what they're saying is 86% of people believe that retail will go into the metaverse. 70% see it as a place to shop. 68% say it's the future of e-commerce. The picture there is of a illustration of a Nike shoe, and Nike is one of the first large companies to go into the metaverse on a retail level. You can actually buy your shoes from a Nike store in Decentraland. And here are some examples. Skechers, the first to sign a lease in Decentraland's fashion district. Now, because they have a fashion district, there's huge demand to be in that district, and the cost of going in is incredibly high. But Skechers will also sell virtual goods through Decentraland, so will Nike. And the idea of those virtual goods is that people can dress up their avatars. So in the same way that you want to look your best when you go to a social event in the physical world, the same applies in the virtual world. Here's a few more brands. The Nike's idea is that they want to meet customers wherever they are, and they want to innovate both the physical and virtual world for future sports experiences. Sotheby's is in Decentraland as well. Fred Siegel's Arcade, a new physical concept store where shoppers can purchase virtual goods alongside physical products. So you can buy physical products, order them, have them sent to your home, but you can also try on virtual products or play with virtual products and then buy them and use those in these virtual worlds. Okay, so let's just stop share there. So those are examples of how and why companies are opening stores in the virtual world. It's a very expensive exercise though, and in the short term, you're not going to see much of a return on investment.
Sorry, what's the current method of payment now? Is it different from other online shopping or real world? Do they have specific Bitcoin
No,
currency?
this is the standard method. You do have currencies. So Second Life, for example, created something called Linden dollars way back in the early 2000s, and Linden dollars could be bought with US dollars, and there were platforms where you could actually exchange Linden dollars for Bitcoins, which is how I got my first fractions of Bitcoins, through Linden dollars, funny enough. And in Second Life, you had to use Linden dollars to make purchases. But mostly in virtual worlds, you use a simple credit card.
Hello. Thank you very much indeed for this wonderful edu-doc that you gave us this morning. And to me, it was my request. I asked Johan if we could be helped with understanding what metaverse means. And I mean, it's such an incredibly exciting but abstract world for me. And I wonder, when you say that, I mean, obviously you're an internet guru, so it makes sense that, for example, you've been a citizen of this decentralized land for a couple of years or more, probably more. But is it likely that people like us in our stage of life would be tantalized or inspired to want to become a citizen of one of these virtual worlds? How would you say, has it improved the quality of your life by being a citizen of this virtual world?
Not at all. Incidentally, the virtual world that I've been a citizen of for 20 years is Second Life. Decentraland I've only been in for the past year or so. And the primary reason I use them is to understand what is being done in there, but it hasn't improved my life in any way whatsoever. And
like Facebook doesn't improve your life necessarily, because
not
that's
necessarily,
a
but
fantasy too.
No, that's different.
Yeah, very.
There's far more use cases for Facebook. Again, it always comes down to the use case, and I know it's a technical term, but it applies in a social environment as well. Facebook has been very powerful for me in reconnecting with old friends, especially school friends. For many years, I was completely out of touch with my school friends. And then along came Facebook. And now I'd say well over half my old classmates are in touch with me from time to time. That was never the case before Facebook came along. Same with family. I'm in touch with family on a regular basis, or I keep up with family are doing to a level that was never possible before Facebook. Okay. So yeah, it has positives and it has reasons. The metaverse doesn't have any of that.
Arthur, I mean, there's a common understanding, and I think it's wrong, that the metaverse and the dark web is the same thing. Now, is that so? And if not, what's the difference?
Not at all. The dark web is, you might call it, almost a secret version of the web, which you can only access with a very specific kind of browser. You've got to use a browser called Tor, or that uses Tor. And Tor is an encrypted environment, or an encrypted browser that accesses sites called onion sites. So in the same way that websites end in .co.za or .com or .org, Tor sites end with .onion. And the term, I think, was used because it reflects the peeling of an onion and getting to deeper and deeper layers. So Tor allows you to get to layers of the internet that aren't accessible via a regular browser. But with a Tor browser, you can then go into the dark web and you can do searches on anything illicit, or that you would want to keep private, or that you don't want anyone to know what you're accessing. So Tor is used very effectively for by journalists in countries where they are under surveillance, and also activists in countries where their activity is regarded as illegal, their political activity. So it's not only about hiring an assassin, which you can do via Tor, or buying drugs, which you can do. Mostly when you buy drugs on the dark web, you are being ripped off. It's also a flourishing environment for buying and selling pornography. Also, mostly you'll be ripped off. And if you give your credit card to anyone on the dark web, you also risk your credit card details being stolen or resold and reused by other people. So it's a very messy environment. It has its use cases, though. We come back to the use case, but it's completely different from the metaverse. The metaverse is an immersive world in which you can replicate your life. The dark web is a version of the web where your online activity remains completely private.
Thank you. Just for the sake of members, about the dark web, I do have a presentation scheduled for September about the dark web, so I'll keep you informed. Dennis, your question?
Thank you. Arthur, I was just interested to read in the news the use of drones. You were saying that at the moment it's more a toy than anything else, but it does seem as if the uses are becoming far more widespread. The news reported, I didn't read the detail of it, but that I think a tank in the Ukraine had been taken out by a drone. So it seems as if well, drones specifically are going to be used for anything in future.
Yeah, very much so. I could do a whole talk on drones as well. The point I was making was that the drones that you buy in shops are mostly used as toys. In many cases, they're also used by photographers and filmmakers. It's become a fantastic movie making and photography tool as well. Aerial photography has been revolutionized by drones. You no longer need an aircraft to do aerial photography. So it comes down again to the use case. Now, when it comes to commercial drones, that's a whole different ballgame. And commercial drones are being used very actively and very extensively in numerous areas, ranging from construction to agriculture. You can imagine construction, how useful it is to have a drone surveying an area of land, but then also a building as it's going up. Also doing safety inspections of buildings and structures that in the past you needed fairly hazardous approaches, like climbing up the side of a tower, for example. Now a drone can do that. In agriculture, there's actually a company in Cape Town called Aerobotics that is a world leader in drones for agriculture, doing scanning of agricultural lands and then using artificial intelligence to analyze those scans. Their technology is being sold worldwide, and they've had hundreds of millions of rands of investment pumped into them, including from Naspers Foundry, which is Naspers's local venture capital entity. So that's on the commercial side. On the military side, drones are incredibly advanced. If you've ever watched Homeland, the series on Netflix, you'll know how deadly drones can be in targeting someone militarily. And now we're seeing in the Russian war on Ukraine, we're seeing drones taken to a new level. The Ukrainians have been provided with a drone that can be used from, I think it's something like 6 kilometers away, to identify tanks or trucks carrying armaments, and then to target a specific tank or truck. And the drone is what they call a single-use drone. It's really a flying bomb that can be controlled from a distance. So it flies over the zone where the troops, tanks, or trucks are coming in, identifies its target, and then literally swoops down and blows up that target. It's been, don't want to call it a game changer. That's a horrible word, but it's almost a war changer for the Ukrainians in being able to stop the advance of Russian tanks and also the resupply of Russian troops with armaments.
Thank you.
Further to the military use case of drones, why is it that only the Ukrainians are using this technology? What happened to the Russians? I thought they were also masters in cyber attacks and technology. Are they so far behind?
They are superb at cyber attacks, but their technology as such is far behind. The United States is far ahead in this particular technology. It's been a big area of emphasis for the American military. And they've been, especially during the Afghanistan war, they've been evolving their technology dramatically. And America is supplying the Ukraine with these specific drones. The Russians don't have the technology.
Thank you, Arthur. I would really like to make you a more regular presenter to our special interest group. Thank you very much for your time and the knowledge that you shared with us. And yes, I'll definitely be in contact and hopefully we can get you back for a future one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks everyone. Well done on your interest, but also your great questions. Thank you. It was great chatting with you.